money, manipulation, and mass poisoning. That's right, everybody. Today we'll be tackling one of the cults that I find the most interesting, Rajneeshpuram. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Cultea. But Mayfield, you may be wondering, where did you go for 2 weeks? That's a good question. I know it's been a while since I've done a cult video on my channel. I kind of wanted to do other videos for all of October. But now we're going to dive back into cults with a cult that I probably know the most about out of any other cult. This series is probably going to be 2 or 3 videos, I'm not entirely sure yet. I also kind of did lose my voice for a couple days there, so if I sound kind of gross, I'm sorry. 2 weeks and I kind of forget what I say at the beginning of these videos. Anyways, if you like what you see, please hit like and subscribe. I'm still just a new YouTuber, so it really helps me out a lot. Before we start, I need to make a disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't believe we have any specific warnings for this video. I know one of the later videos on Rajneeshpuram will probably need something a little bit more specific, but I think this one overall is going to be pretty safe. As usual, here's a shot of my outfit for today. My dress and socks are from Angelic Pretty. My blouse is from Baby the Starshine Bright, as are my beret and hair bows. Everything else is off-brand. So now that we have all of that out of the way, I'll pour the tea and we can get into it. Okay, let's go. So for this first video on Rajneeshpuram, I'm going to talk about the life and times of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, or Osho. In India, Bhagwan means the Blessed One. It's sort of a term of endearment bestowed upon Hindu masters by their followers. But in the case of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, the name was allegedly adopted by the man himself. And this supposedly blessed individual started from humble but not altogether unpleasant beginnings. On December 11th, 1931, Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh was born with the name Mohan Chandra Rajneesh. He was born to his parents Babalal and Saraswati. I should probably also preface this series by saying I am going to butcher a lot of these names. If you're better at pronouncing them than I am, please correct me in the comments. His mother birthed him in his maternal grandmother's home, which was located about 60 kilometers away from his family home, where his family had a cloth business. In his grandparents' home, they apparently had an extensive library, and the young Rajneesh apparently used this library to consume a myriad of religious texts early in his life. He attended primary school and high school where he learned English and honed his public speaking skills. So here's the thing about cult leader origin stories. We oftentimes hear them from people within the cult or the cult leader themselves, which means they're often lies. Because cult leaders want to make something up that makes them sound like holy and spiritual, like they're from another plane of existence or something. Usually. But this time the origin story does sound fairly believable. In the 1980s, the Oregonian published a 20-part series of articles on Rajneesh and his cult. They interviewed many of the people closest to him to try and get to the bottom of his origin story. One of these interviews they conducted was with Rajneesh's uncle. He said Rajneesh was a, quote, brilliant and intelligent student who read all of the books in the library. It should also be noted, however, that his uncle was an official disciple or follower of his nephew's philosophies. This uncle also described Rajneesh as naughty as a child, which I feel like is kind of a weird thing to call your savior, but I mean, I guess he was a kid, whatever. When Rajneesh came of age, he wanted nothing to do with his family business. Selling cloth was not exactly his idea of an excellent life. He instead went 130 miles east to the University of Jabalpur, where he pursued studies in English, philosophy, logic, and political science. During his college years, he began an obsessive search for spiritual enlightenment, in between studying and working part-time as a copy editor for a Hindu newspaper. On March 21st of 1953, Rajneesh supposedly achieved spiritual enlightenment while sitting under a Bodh tree in Gaya, India. However, he would go on to keep this a secret from everybody for 20 years, for fear that someone might do him harm for obtaining the highest spiritual attainment. Apparently, the tree is still somewhere in a park in Jabalpur. So here's my problem I have with the whole enlightenment story he's telling, and it's also the main reason why I find him to be something of a con man. Normally I try not to be so opinionated early on in my videos, but I've got a lot of problems with this guy. While Rajneesh was a very educated man, he was also very young at this time. And with my limited knowledge on Eastern religions, I do know that it takes many, many years, if not multiple lifetimes, for people to truly achieve spiritual enlightenment. And while Rajneesh was a well-educated man, he wasn't that spiritual. He read a lot about religions for sure, but what did he really do? There are people who dedicate their entire lifetimes to eating a certain way, dressing a certain way, living a certain lifestyle, and they never achieve enlightenment. And you're telling me this regular man who went to college and read a lot of books somehow just achieved spiritual enlightenment while sitting under a tree? I'm likely being a little judgmental, but I do feel like if someone was going to achieve spiritual enlightenment, it wouldn't be him. So knowing all of this information, it begs the question, does Rajneesh actually believe that he has achieved spiritual enlightenment? Or is he knowingly lying to people? Because from my viewpoint, it just sounds like this was a story he came up with 20 years after the fact to make himself sound more credible. Like he needed to think of something fast and that's what he came up with. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off track, so let's get back into it. 2 years after the supposed enlightenment, Rajneesh graduated from college and moved straight into master's coursework. And then in 1959, he took a teaching position in the University of Jabalpur network. He did not stick to lecturing alone in a classroom, however. He traveled the country giving lectures and honing his spiritual ideas, which were a combination of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Jainism, oh my god, I'm Southern. There is no exact moment in Rajneesh's life where we can pinpoint where he just decided to be a cult leader. I think that's actually very rare for people to just sit down one day and be like, I'm gonna be a cult leader. Like, I'm gonna lie to a ton of people. You know, no one thinks that. Most likely, he just realized he had a talent for public speaking, and he realized how his words would affect his audience. The years Rajneesh spent as a wandering lecturer in 1960s India were kind of like a masterclass in manipulation for him, like a practice run of sorts. So now let's talk about the beliefs and the beginnings of this cult. A critical thing to remember about Rajneesh in these early years is that he wasn't really peddling an actual religion. In fact, he supposedly greatly disliked organized religion. He taught that taboos and ideas around sin were results of oppressive and inaccurate belief systems. So if you're one of Rajneesh's students, this probably would help absolve you of any guilt that you felt. Rajneesh spoke out against traditional religious and political leaders like Gandhi. He called these people masochists, saying that they were propelling dead Eastern religions that inhibited rather than helped the followers. He also began to dip his toes into political science discourse, saying that capitalism rather than socialism was the path forwards for society at large. People who tended to have guilty consciences loved Rajneesh's message, especially wealthy people who might not have made their money in the most equitable of ways. Over time, he began to pick up more and more followers and financial backers. Eventually, in the 1960s, Rajneesh was known as the rich man's guru. He had several patrons who donated a lot of money to his cause through his first official business entity. It was known as the Life Awakening Center. He decided to leave behind his life of being an academic lecturer, and he focused all of his attention on spreading his spiritual message and obtaining new followers. In 1967, one of Rajneesh's earliest followers, who we will call Barty, suggested that he sell tickets to his lectures. This was a huge moment for Rajneesh. The audience at his lectures exploded, they were massive, and he was starting to make an income from it. In 1969, Rajneesh and his small group of followers decided to set down roots in Mumbai, formerly Bombay. He hosted meditation camps in old hotels and vacated palaces for people who were seeking spiritual awakening. Over the next 3 years, Rajneesh got really good at what he was doing. He organized the structure of his group over this period of time, and he managed to figure out what his brand was, if you could call it that. He amassed thousands of followers in India for his unorthodox teachings. Rajneesh had married Eastern spiritual traditions with Western psychotherapy techniques. It created a strange hybrid that really appealed to Westerners. In 1974, Westerners began to flock to his newly established ashram in Pune, India. By this point, he adopted the title of Bhagwan, and he was known by all of his followers as Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. So now let's start to discuss his first and more notable followers. The 7 years that Rajneesh operated his commune in Pune, India in the mid to late 1970s were boom years for the organization, both fiscally and socially. He began to call his faithful followers sannyasins, which is a little ironic because a sannyasin traditionally is someone who renounces material life in all forms. Rajneesh taught his followers that poverty was not necessary to achieve a higher state of spiritualism, so his sannyasins were encouraged to generate wealth for the commune. His early followers were essential in catapulting Rajneesh and his beliefs into the view of a broader audience. They essentially became what was like his early marketing team, and it included a few of the following people. A man who went by the name Anand Bahadharma was a Bombay businessman who held cocktail parties and shindigs for Rajneesh and his wealthy investor friends. These cocktail parties were essential in exposing Rajneesh to open-minded Westerners. He helped attract wealthy and educated followers for Rajneesh, including a Greek heiress whose funds were used to purchase the compound in India. Another follower of Rajneesh was a woman who went by the name of Yoga Lakshmi. She was Bahadharma's sister and Rajneesh's personal assistant for over 7 years. She helped organize Rajneesh's movement into a fully fledged money-making enterprise. However, her position as Rajneesh's personal assistant was taken from her by Ma Anand Sheela in 1981, when Lakshmi became unable to obtain larger property for the ashram in India. Another notable follower of Rajneesh's was an Australian housewife by the name of Ma Shanti B. She was a woman who found herself in an unhappy, resentful marriage in the early 1970s. She had taken her husband to a marriage counseling session at a fledgling Rajneesh ashram in Australia. For the first time during this visit, she participated in dynamic meditation, and from that point forward, she was a convert. For the next decade and a half, she becomes a major player in the organization and in both the India and Oregon communes. And she eventually also becomes an essential ally and follower to Ma Anand Sheela, which brings us to what I feel is Rajneesh's most notable follower. Rajneesh's most ardent follower and the woman with the most influence in the cult aside from Rajneesh himself was Sheela Ambalal Patel, aka Ma Anand Sheela. Born on December 28th of 1949, Sheela is the youngest of 6 children. The Patels lived on land that was very close to where Rajneesh would go to school, so that puts them in very close proximity to each other. Sheela was first introduced to Rajneesh's belief systems back in 1967. Her father had taken her to one of Rajneesh's lectures in Bombay right before she was set to leave for college in the United States. She did leave to go to college in the US, but she came back 5 years later when her mother fell ill. By this point, Sheela had already married and formed up a new life in America. But a fateful trip to Rajneesh's Bombay apartment changed everything for her. Sheela's father had taken her to speak with the Bhagwan. She said years later of this meeting, quote, "I saw Bhagwan and that was the end of me. My life was complete. My life was fulfilled." Both she and her then husband Mark became loyal followers to Rajneesh. Tragically, in 1980, Sheela's husband Mark did die of Hodgkin's lymphoma. But this tragedy only solidified Sheela's belief, her devotion to Rajneesh. During this time, Rajneesh was exploring expansion ideas for his commune. Sheela worked to establish a meditation center in New Jersey, as well as farming communes in India. Sheela eventually became the assistant to Yoga Lakshmi, learning the ins and outs of the ashram's business. In 1981, Rajneesh officially made Sheela his private secretary, and with that role came significant power over his organization. And that's where we're going to end part 1 of this series. Next week, we're going to talk a lot more about the businesses that the cult ran, how they made their money, how they were being sneaky, their belief systems, things like that. The nitty-gritty details. I will also be releasing these videos in order in succession, so you guys won't have to wait for me to make a weird video before waiting for part 3 or whatever. Does that make sense? I don't know. I feel like I'm starting to lose my voice, so I think I'm gonna go. It's pretty late. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. I'm still just a new YouTuber, so it really helps me out a lot. I'll see you again next week, okay guys? Bye!